Woody?
Good morning, Chairperson.
Yes.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Mkwanazi. Thank you for
Good morning, Chair.
Thank you for coming back to the commission, even though virtually, but you are not testifying for the first time. Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Maibek.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. As you know, our next witness is Mr. Mkwanazi. He's going to be giving evidence via Zoom.
Yes, just 1 second, Mr. Maibek. Where is that other light that is usually there? I thought there would be two. I don't know, I see it's a little dark, but maybe I shouldn't be concerned about it. Yeah, well, the technicians, the people who deal with it know what I'm talking about. I think they'll attend to it. Okay, Mr. Maibek.
Chairperson, as you know, Mr. Mkwanazi is going to give evidence by way of Zoom, by agreement with the parties and with your direction. Perhaps he could be sworn in as a witness, and then I'll take him to his affidavit, and that can then be admitted.
Oh, okay, all right.
I have been asked to inquire whether you're happy with the arrangements.
Well, I'm happy with the arrangement. I'm just realizing that you will be looking there. I'll be. I wonder whether it was not possible to have this somewhere there where we could both see him, but it's not a big deal.
We tried that. There was really organized chaos before you arrived.
Oh, is that so?
Chairperson, I think this is probably the best that we can.
Okay, let's stick to this so long, yeah.
And so if I might just mention, I think there is an absence of lighting. The lighting has been moved to my left so that it doesn't shine directly in my face, so that I can look at the screen. So it might appear slightly darker to you.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. Okay.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Chair. I want to take the opportunity to say to the President, my name is Hmg Contract Incorporated, and I am with Mr. Mafika Mkwanazi. And once again,
I'm sorry. I think the reception is quite poor. I can't hear the speaker. I can't even.
Is it better? Chairperson?
Yes.
Okay, I was saying that this management is also my name is from Operator, and I represent Mr. Mafika.
Oh yes, it's Mr. Mkwanazi, the lawyer.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, I remember. Yes. No, thank you very much. I don't know what it is, but when you speak, it's not as clear as it ought to be. I mentioned that so that when next time there is a need for you to speak, hopefully whatever it is that may need to be attended to will have been attended to, yeah. I hope Mr. Mkwanazi will be clear when he speaks. Mr. Mkwanazi, can you hear me? Yes, okay, it looks like we can hear you. Okay, Mr. Maibek?
Yes, thank you.
I'll administer the oath of affirmation first.
Mr. Mkwanazi, please stand up.
Okay, I'm standing. Lee is witnessing okay. Wait, I need to remove this chair.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Please, please state your full names for the record.
Mafika Hmg Mkwanazi.
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
I do not take an objection.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you.
I see you took off your jacket, Mr. Mkwanazi. Is it too hot where you are?
I can put it on, Chairman.
Yeah, I think put it on if you don't mind.
Okay. That's very much. Okay.
I was wondering whether you took your jacket off because it was already hot there, or whether it was in anticipation of heat. Okay, all right, Mr. Maibek.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Mr. Mkwanazi.
Good morning, Advocate.
You would have been provided with a bundle of documents referred to as Bundle 4A.
Yes.
Could I please ask you to turn to page 1 in that bundle?
Okay. Is it written exhibit BB18?
Yes, that is correct. If you go to-
I'm sorry, Mr. Maibek. On the spine, the first writing should be Transnet Bundle 04A. Is that correct, Mr. Maibek?
Correct.
Yeah, and then below that it says exhibit BB18. Have you got the correct one, Mr. Mkwanazi?
Yes, I've got the one exhibit BB18, and then on the second page, it's an index BB18,
Yeah.
then
No, it is the right
on
one.
the next page, it's a declaration.
Yeah, it is the right one.
So, Mr. Mkwanazi, during the course of your testimony, when I refer to page numbers, I'm referring to the black page numbers. Here on this page, page 3 on the left-hand side. Do you see that?
No, I see that.
I'd like just to start off by asking you to confirm, is this your declaration?
That is correct, Advocate.
If you could then please turn to the end of your declaration at page 20.
Yes, I'm at page 20.
And do you confirm that you signed this declaration on the 31st of August this year?
I do confirm.
And then I would ask you to confirm, attached to your affidavit were a series of annexures. We have A, B, and C. C was the KPMG report. If you then turn all the way to page, right at the end of the flag, to page 21.412. Are you there?
Not yet, I'm at 21.412, yes.
We received the annexures up to A, B, and C. We didn't receive D and E.
Yes, I see that.
All right. So you confirm that annexures A, B, and C were annexures to your affidavit?
I will confirm, yes.
All right. Thank you. Now, Mr. Mkwanazi, if you could go back then, please, to page 3.
Yes.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to lead you through your declaration. And I'm going to give you the opportunity of presenting the evidence that is set out here. And after that, I'll have a series of questions for you, and obviously the chairperson would ask questions whenever he wishes to. You follow the process?
Yes, I do.
Okay, let's start off then with your personal details at paragraph 1.
That is true.
Were you an executive director of Transnet from 1996 to 2001.
That is correct.
You're also a former Group Chief Executive Officer of Transnet, and you held that position from 2001 to 2003.
That is correct.
And then I suppose, importantly for present purposes, you say, I'm also the former Chairman of the Board of Transnet, having held that position for a period of 4 years, from December 2010 to December 2014.
That is correct.
You say that you were furthermore the Chairman of the Corporate Governance and Nomination Committee, as well as a member of the Acquisitions and Disposal Committee during your tenure on the board.
That is correct.
You then go on to say at paragraph 4.1 that you were asked to provide this declaration, essentially dealing with the decision to enter into a settlement with Mr. Gama and reinstate him. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you were also asked to deal with the terms of that settlement agreement.
That is correct.
Perhaps I could ask you then to pick up at paragraph 4.2 and verbalize what's contained there about your meeting with Minister Gigabyte.
Yes, I think paragraph 4.2 confirms that I was approached by Minister Gigabyte to join the board of Transnet sometime in December for a period of 3 years. And also in that meeting with Mr. Gigabyte, he indicated a few areas of concern. One of those was a lack of transformation, as there were very few senior positions held by African women. The other, he was under the impression that the procurement systems of Transnet was open to corruption by employees and other stakeholders. He emphasized that as the incoming chair of the board, this must be an area of focus. He also somehow was aware of problems in the procurement of suppliers and services for mega projects in Transnet. These would have included the Devon Harbour entrance widening, the Cape Town Container Terminal, the new multi-purpose pipeline, the Muha Container Terminal, the coal line expansion, the Aono expansion, and the appointment of global consultants for engineering, procurement, construction, and management, and other feasibilities, and one or the other study. He also was under the impression that the disciplinary matter at Transnet were racially biased, and that there was a condonation process at Transnet that was generally used to deal with deviations within Transnet.
I just ask you to confirm, when did you hold this meeting with Minister Gigabyte?
Sometime in October. I don't recall the date.
In October
2010.
2010.
2010, yes.
All right, please carry on.
I'm sorry. Is there a possibility that you might be mistaken with regard to the month, and that the month might be November?
Sure, I thought it was October. It's a long time ago, but I really thought it was October.
The reason I'm raising that question is that in October 2010, Mr. Gigabyte was not Minister of Public Enterprises as yet. It was still Ms. Barbara Hogan, and she was dropped from cabinet on the 31st of October 2010. That's the evidence she gave, and her and Mr. Gigabyte's appointment was announced, would have been announced probably on the 31st of October or 1st of November. So he only became Minister of Public Enterprises from the 1st of November. So I'm wondering whether it might be October or whether it might be in November.
Chairman, your observation is correct, but my recollection, it was sometime in October.
Sometime in October.
And, yes, and I'm not sure if the minister has put in his own affidavit. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, we have got an affidavit from him, but I don't think it says anything about any date of your meeting, but I may be mistaken. But of course, it is maybe possible that maybe if he had been informed already before the end of October, maybe confidentially, that he would be taking over, maybe he could start looking at matters that he thought they were urgent. I'm not sure. But anyway, your recollection is that it was in October.
That's my recollection.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Mkwanazi, then could you deal with the next heading, please? Background to deviations in contracts at Transnet.
Yes, Advocate, unfortunately I have to read from this transcript. Transnet has always had a detailed procurement procedure manual. Even in 1996, there would have been a tender manual and tender board that gets amended from time to time. These guide the organization on how to procure goods and services from time to time. Our board, the December 2010, December 2014 board, also amended the procurement procedure manual in 2011. Transnet also has a delegation of authority frameworks that gets reviewed by a subcommittee and is approved by the Transnet board from time to time. This delegation of authority framework defines the powers of the board subcommittees, and executives, generally up to the group chief executive. Then the group chief executive officer has authority to sub-delegate to his or her executive committee. In these delegations of authority, there are financial limits and other limits for all executives, including the Transnet board. Some matters get elevated to the shareholder for approval following the guidelines in the shareholder compact. In these financial limits, executives can increase certain contract values by a defined percentage or not exceed contracts by a predetermined amount. There are financial limits on appointment of consultants and other service providers. Should these be exceeded during execution, the responsible executive must report to his or her manager so that the issue can be referred back to the Divisional or Transnet Acquisition Council or the Transnet Board if it was the original approval. In most cases, the Transnet internal audit gets involved to determine fruitless and wasteful expenditure. This is how deviations in contracts are identified. The structure that approves that contract must determine if the continuation is granted or not. The line manager of the offender must take disciplinary action if warranted. Can I continue?
Yes, please. So then, in the next part of your declaration,
Yes.
under heading 6, you deal with, as you put it, the history of deviations at Transnet, and that runs through pages 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then at 13, you deal with condemnations at Transnet Freight Rail. At 14, deviations in respect of mega projects. And then one goes all the way to 17 before you then deal with Mr. Gama. What is
That is correct.
What is it that you want to say about the history of deviations at Transnet?
I will not read the submission line by line, but in a nutshell, there was a strange, it's not strange, it's part of the PPM, by the way, which the procurement procedure manual, which does allow for certain deviations, but they need to be approved further up, and also it allows for condonations. So what I was trying to sketch here, and by the way, the things that I mentioned in my submission are events from 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, and 2009. I indicate that there were many deviations, there were many condonations, and there's three that comes to mind because they were major. There's one on the appointment or the condonation of the VAE contract, which somehow became irregular because when the approval was done, I think it was done at 980 million. And by the time it reached my office as the acting group CEO for condonation, the amount was 1.778 million, which is 1.8 billion, roughly. Now, and funny enough, that particular contract implicated a lot of people in some irregular behavior. In that those people, various teams in TFR, in group, kept on trying to fix this problem, and they delayed. I don't know why it took so long for them to bring this thing up to the board for condonation. But eventually it came to the Transnet board through my office for condonation, and I then elevated the matter to the board. And on elevating it, I indicated that disciplinary action needs to be taken against, it was going to be plus or minus 10 to 12 executives who had been involved in, some of it was worrisome. It bordered on doing things without authority, etc., etc. So yes, it was brought to the board, and a condonation was given by the board. So that's a typical part, that's a big deviation. And that's why it needed board approval. Another one which comes to mind besides the VAE contract is the Hmg contract, which the executives, it started as a flow contract. Then about a year and a half into a flow contract, they then changed it to an Hmg contract. But the processes followed were flawed, and therefore it became an irregular contract. And in executing that contract, certain elements of that contract were implemented irregularly. And there's some element of fruitless and wasteful expenditure in that contract. It came from a division called Transnet Capital Project, and the CEO was Ms. Moira Moises. And of course, even this contract, the Hmg, had to come through certain processes and be looked at, and a condonation sort of required. Although the project itself was far bigger, it's just the irregularity of it that required a condonation. And in that process, the group CEO, Brian Mulife, was instructed to take these disciplinary actions against not only Ms. Moira Moses, but maybe 3 to 4 other executives within Transnet Capital Projects. Then another big one which needed, now these condonations are now done in 2011, and yet these contracts were signed maybe in 2005, 2006, and 2007. Another big one was an AWP, Arab Wali Parcels, where for some reason there were also an engineering procurement, construction management service provider. The contract value increased from about 1.7 billion to over 3 billion. And again, the board, sometime in 2011, had to take a decision to condone, and also specify that disciplinary action must be taken on those involved. Now, I just mentioned these three, but there were others. Not too many, because I'm focusing on the big ones. Small ones in the KPMG report are mentioned. I'm not sure how many in total there were, but yes, others' contribution was granted, others' contribution was not granted.
All right. Could I perhaps just take you back to the beginning at paragraph 6.1? You say, this is at page 6, on 22 December and in February 2011, sorry, 22 December 2010 and in February 2011, the Public Protector made certain allegations about Transnet procurement procedures and the Gama matter. The new board appointed this JV of KPMG and Konki to investigate a number of issues around the procurement at Transnet on the basis of the Public Protector allegations and Gama's appeal on the sanction of dismissal. The first report was done quickly on the as the information was historical. It is that first report that was used by the board in its deliberations. A law firm, Norton Rose, was consulted by Transnet, and a different law firm, Weber Wenzel, was used by KPMG and Konki. The final report was completed in November 2011, as there was a lot of resistance from executives in cooperating with the KPMG and Konki team. Would you confirm that?
Yes, I'll confirm that, and maybe let me add something that is not clearly covered there. There were a few board meetings that happened in January, and I don't have minutes of those, etc. But already before the end of January, Transnet at the time had a funny environment where people were coming with allegations of this and the other. So yes, the matter that Nkonki covered, even though the report was published, the final report was published in November, the company knew already of some of these matters. And I'm also looking for that information because I did present some of that information to the board or a board subcommittee even before the end of January in terms of some of these. And finally, some of these are not even mentioned even in the KPMG report, but I'm aware of them because I then forwarded, typically there was one which I forwarded to the group chief executive of an irregular consulting contract by the then group general manager. And yes, I still don't have the list of all consulting contracts that were entered into by, I still don't have it today, but at the time I was forwarded with what looked like an irregular contract, and I handed it over to Mr. Prime Minister.
So, Mr. Mkwanazi, what you then do at 6.2 is you start listing the findings of the KPMG and Konki report, as you say, which was finalized in November 2011. All right. And then over the page at 6.4, you deal with an internal audit report dated May 2011. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then I just wanted to make sure that I understand. I mean, it seems to me that by and large, then the contents of this 7 or 8 pages is really taken from the KPMG report. Is that fair enough?
100% correct. But having said that, there were reports. There were reports like there was a report published called by Transnet Internal Audit. It was called Transnet or TFR Procurement Irregularities. I think it was done in 2008. I had seen that report, but now when I asked for that report, it's not available. So the fact that I'm using a November KPMG final report, to me really is the fact that then KPMG had to go back and dig deeper of the things that were known to have happened as early as 2005, 6, 7, 8, and 9.
All right. Then, Mr. Mkwanazi, just so that I confirm and understand your evidence, you say, look, there were smaller issues, but you've identified, and I suppose it's appropriate to look at the bigger issue. You've identified 3 main examples. It's the VAE contract, if I understand you correctly.
That's correct.
The HMG contract.
Yes.
And what was the third one?
I think it's the AWP, Alan Wali Person.
AWP contract.
That's correct.
I just ask you to confirm, as I understand your evidence, you say that condonation was granted in respect of all of those irregularities, but disciplinary action was then instituted against the managers involved.
Wait. Condonation was granted on condition that the managers involved would be disciplined.
Yes.
Yes. Now, when the HMG condonation was granted, Brian Mulife was instructed to discipline Ms. Moira Moses. And I'm not sure of the dynamics of those discussions, but Ms. Moira Moses immediately resigned.
All right. Well, just to summarize then, in relation to each of these three big contracts, VAE, HMG, and AWP, condonation was granted on condition, as you've put it, that disciplinary action be taken against the relevant managers.
Yes.
All right.
That is correct.
Could I take you, please, to page 10 of your affidavit? And let me direct your attention to paragraph 6.5, where you deal with the VAE contract. And then at paragraph 6.5.1, the second portion of it, you say the VAE contract of 960 million in 2006 was subsequently increased to 1.775 million, or billion actually. Condonation for contract extension and payments without a signed contract was only applied for in February 2011 and was granted by Hmg Mkwanazi in his capacity as acting GCCO, subject to disciplinary action being taken against those responsible. Is that correct?
Yes.
So would
correct.
you would
let me, I might have elevated that one to the board. I don't recall that.
Yeah. But would you confirm then that condonation was applied for?
Yes, it was applied for.
All right. And then if you go to page 14 of your affidavit, paragraph 8.2 deals with HMG. That's the other big contract that you spoke of. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Where do you deal with AWP?
It's somewhere in the report. I'm not sure, but it is somewhere there.
Yes, but
I'll have to find it myself. Yeah. It is somewhere in there.
do you deal with it in your declaration?
Yes, it's actually in a board minute as well, where I think it was a June board meeting where now this condonation was elevated to the board, and the board did condone the expenditure on AWP. But let's come back to HMG, yes.
All right. I wanted then to take you to paragraph 9 and to focus then in on the disciplinary action taken against Mr. Gama. Is there anything else that you want to say in relation to deviations and condonation? Historical.
Not really. Let's go to then paragraph 9.
All right, thank you. So perhaps I could ask you to deal with this. Could you start with paragraph 9.1 and take the chairperson through your evidence in this regard?
Yes. Should I read it?
Well, it would be better if you verbalize it, but of course you're allowed to have regard to the text of the declaration.
Now, let me verbalize it. From the view of, by the way, even this verbalization, I think maybe comes from the KPMG report, which was trying to indicate that on similar matters like Gama, the company was consistent in dealing with certain issues. But then again, on similar matters like Gamma, the company was not consistent in that there are other, now these matters are not identical, by the way, we need to understand that. Because if then you look into detail into what are these matters, they are not the same. They are not the same, yeah. In a nutshell, that's it. Now, in a nutshell as well, what I'm trying to indicate, and I'm not with certainty, is that had Ghana been given the opportunity to go through the condonation process, maybe the authority to condone might have come with a different sanctions. I don't know, maybe demotion, maybe dismissal, I really don't know. But there's that possibility that the authorizing individual would have come to a different conclusion. Same as we have asked as a board that those who were guilty of certain irregular and certain fruitless and wasteful expenditure contracts must be disciplined. I don't know the outcome of those disciplinary actions.
All right, well, let me take you to the text.
Yes.
You say at paragraph 9.2, I submit that with regard to the Gama matter and a review of similar fact matters, the board was of the view that disciplinary action instituted for the committed irregularities appeared rather to be an exception rather than the rule. We further noted that the disciplinary process was not consistently applied to all transgressions, but rather a process of condonation is consistently applied with no disciplinary action being taken against offenders. These observations are in line with Mr. Garma's view that, quote, he was doubtful that other employees who had acted in a way similar to that way he had been charged for tender irregularities and that there was a selective application of charges. You say then Gama was not afforded the opportunity for condonement in his matter based on the view that the transgressions were of such a serious nature that they warranted disciplinary action. However, evidence also suggests that other senior employees had, in certain instances, not complied with the necessary procurement procedures, yet none of them were subjected to any disciplinary procedures as Mr. Gama was. That's what you state. And then in two perhaps important passages that I may ask you a number of questions about, you say, I personally fully agree with the disciplinary process and findings of the then Transnet board. The only difficulty I have is that there was this common process in the Transnet systems called condonation. Based on the context of TFR on condonations, Gama should have, by virtue of consistency of its application, been afforded the opportunity to apply for condonation. Gama was not given the opportunity to apply for this by Transnet internal audit and the then GCEO, Ms. Maria Ramos. The outcomes could have been different had he been afforded that opportunity. That's what you've said, correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
Can I comment?
Yes, certainly.
That's why I say the outcome could have been. The outcome could have been the same. Even though it would have gone through whatever condonement application, it could have been the same.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just incidentally, did Mr. Gama apply for condonation?
I don't know.
I see.
I really don't know. Yeah.
And then at paragraph 9...
I'm sorry, did you try and find out whether he had at any stage applied for condonation?
Chairman, I did not, because as you can imagine, I'm dealing with this matter almost 7 months after Gama was dismissed. And I was not communicating with him or with anybody else. But that would have been the duty of KPMG, in my interpretation, to find out if it did. I don't know.
Now, isn't the position that an employee who seeks condonation must request condonation or apply for condonation.
That is correct.
Now, Mr. Gama was a very senior employee in the company. From what I understand, from what I heard in the past few days about TFR at Transnet, it seems that TFR was the largest division at Transnet. Is that correct? So we are talking here about somebody who was employed as CEO of the largest division within cabinet, within Transnet.
Within Transnet.
You're talking about somebody who was leading his division with a lot of people, employees and other managers under him, who is supposed to have had knowledge of these policies and processes we are talking about. Is that not so?
That is correct, Chairman.
Because he would be needed, his job needed him to even guide those under him on these policies, isn't it?
That is correct, Chairman.
Therefore, you are dealing with somebody whom you are supposed to expect to have known of the existence of this condonation process, and that an employee can apply for it if the employee wishes it to be invoked. Is that right?
He should have known, yes.
And if he did not apply for it, there may be no reason why you or the board should bother to come to his assistance when he elected not to use it when he knew about it, isn't it?
Yes, Chairman.
You accept that?
Yes, I do, Chairman.
Yes. So the question that arises is that when the issue of condonation arose within the context of his dismissal dispute, I would have expected your attitude as well as the attitude of the board to be that, well, one, we are not here dealing with a lowly employee. We're dealing with an executive who knows the policies of the organization. First of all, did he apply for it? Did he want condonation? Because if he wanted condonation, one would expect that he would have applied. Did he apply for it? And if the answer is he did not apply for it, then the next thing is, why should we assist him with something that he was aware of and could have invoked and did not invoke? That is the attitude I would have expected. Do you think that's a fair expectation?
Chairman, I don't have facts whether he did or whether he did not. But when you look at the quantums of some of the condonnations that we had to deal with, which ran into billions of rand, and those were granted subject to disciplinary action. I don't have a record of whether did he or did he not. I really don't have that record.
No, I accept that you don't know whether he did or he didn't, but that's part of my question, because I am saying, since you knew as the board that you were dealing with an executive who ought to know the company policies and so on, when this issue of condonation was raised in the context of his dismissal, my expectation is that the first reaction from you and the board ought to have been, did he apply for it? Because this condonation, you have to apply for it as an employee if you want it to be invoked. And I'm concerned about why you didn't ask that question, or you didn't try to establish whether he did apply for it.
Chairman, my interpretation is that the KPMG forensic should have looked into whether he did or not. That is why there's an element of doubt as well, whether he would have been granted or not granted that condonation, and whether he would have been disciplined or not disciplined, based on the other similar matters of contracts which ran into billions, and no disciplinary action was taken against those individuals, except in 2011, when the offenses were committed in 2005.
Yes, but maybe I'm not articulating my concern as clearly as I should. I accept that you say you don't know whether he did apply for condonation. I accept that you say you did not investigate that issue. I accept for present purposes that you think KPMG maybe should have looked into that issue. My issue is, my expectation is that before you went to look into any number of previous cases where condonation had been granted, I would have expected you and the board to say, oh, there is this issue of condonation being raised, but condonation has to be applied for. We want to find out whether he did apply. And if he did apply, what was the outcome of that process? Before you could go and dig and dig and dig, that's my question. I'm wondering why that's not the attitude you and the board took. And I'm asking whether you think my expectation of what your board should have done is unfair, or you accept that it's fair.
I think it is fair, Chairman, and I empathize with your position, and of course these things happened many years ago. I still don't know if it did apply. It would be of interest to still get that information, whether it did apply or not. And at times this application for condonation was a strange thing, because at times it came via a Transnet internal audit, and now my recollection now as an executive, which is maybe in 1996 or 1997, in a situation like this, the request for a condonation would not just have come directly from the individual. It would have come in partnership with the Transnet internal audit, so that it's put on record that as you get this condonation, you also get a final written warning. That was the culture then, but that's many years ago.
Yes. Yes. Okay, no, that's fine. Mr. Mybeck?
Thank you. Mr. Mkwanazi, you say that KPMG should have looked into this, but of course you agreed to reinstate Mr. Gama long before KPMG completed its investigation.
That is correct. As I indicate, there was a preliminary report by KPMG. If you recall, when Transnet responded to the public protector letter in April of 2011, there was a preliminary KPMG report attached. Now, I've not seen that report, and it's also true that even as early as before the end of January, there was a KPMG preliminary report and other reports from a Transnet internal audit on irregularities in procurement. They are there, those reports were there. And
So-
they articulated these irregularities, and also they articulated the wrongdoings, the sanctions, the no sanction. So there was that element of doubt then that maybe there was lack of consistency.
But Mr. Mkwanazi, you dealt with Mr. Gama on the basis that he hadn't been offered or applied for condonation. That's the basis upon which you dealt with him.
Yes,
Yes.
in that had he applied,
Yes. So let's go
I
then,
would have been different. Yeah.
let's go to the last sentence of paragraph 9.4. You say, in effect, if he had applied, the outcome could have been different. Is that right?
That is correct.
Let's go to paragraph 9.5. The incoming Transnet board of 2010, which was dealing with these mega projects that were frankly not managed well, had to somehow try and deal with the Gama matter on the assumption that he would have been granted condonation. I don't understand, because if you just bear with me, at the end of paragraph 9.4, you say, well, you don't know if he would have, but then you treat him with the benefit of the doubt that he would have been.
That is correct. But then, having said you treat him with the doubt, you then just don't leave it there. You then have got to deal with what type of sanction. And would you then have given a Mr. Gama?
And you can,
I'm sorry, Mr. Mybeck. Please don't forget your line of
Yes, I beg your
thought. There is something that I should have asked earlier, but I thought I would ask later, but I think it comes in now. Mr. Mkwanazi, I think we can accept that Mr. Gama did not apply for condonation. Are you prepared to accept that, or you think he probably did, or you think he may or may not? I think by now we would have known if he had applied for condonation. There was a lengthy disciplinary process. You remember that?
That is correct, yes.
At which he was represented not just by an attorney, as I understand the position, by even senior counsel. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
And that disciplinary hearing, I'm told, the actual hearing took 14 days. And when you read the rulings of the chairperson, you can see that the matters were dealt with extensively. Now, do you think that Mr. Gama, if he had applied for condonation, he would not have told his lawyers that he applied for condonation and it was granted if it was granted, or it was refused if it was refused? He would have told them. Yes.
Yes, and he would have disclosed it.
Yeah, it's unthinkable that he would not have mentioned that he did apply for it. Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can accept that he did not apply for it. And actually, you do you not, that the issue of condonation was raised at the disciplinary hearing by his lawyers. You know that?
Yes, I recall, yeah.
So the lawyers would have dealt with all of those issues, and they would have said he applied for condonation, and if he was granted condonation, they would have said that we would be knowing it from the ruling of the chairperson, or if he was refused condonation and they thought he was unfairly refused, they would have told the chairperson of the disciplinary inquiry. You accept that?
That is correct.
So he did not apply for condonation. Okay? And you either knew that he did not apply, or if you didn't know, to get to know would have been the easiest thing, isn't it? To find out, did he apply? One way is to ask him or ask his lawyers. You accept that?
I accept it, yeah.
Yes. Now, as I understand your affidavit, the door that you or the board use in order to get to reinstate him is to say Mr. Gama was not offered the opportunity of a condonation. Am I right?
You are correct, Chair.
Yes. Now, is it fair to put it that way when you are dealing with an executive like Mr. Gama? Because he didn't need to be offered condonation. He knew there was this process. He knew he could apply for it, and he elected, for whatever reason, not to apply for it. You accept that, don't you?
I accept that, Chair.
And if there is any unfairness arising from that, it would be an unfairness that he brought it upon himself by deciding not to apply for that call for that process, isn't it? You accept that? You accept that?
I accept it, Chair.
Once you accept that there was nothing unfair about him not having been offered the opportunity of condonation, because he knew he could apply, he elected for reasons known to himself not to apply, then isn't the position that then there is no sympathy for him? There ought to be no sympathy for him.
Chairman, your observation is correct. And also then, Chairman, it's a strange environment, that Transnet, in that I'm not sure how many condonations were granted every year in that organization, and I'm not sure, but it was quite common, but that he didn't take that advantage in terms of that. I don't know why he didn't do it. Yeah.
But he can't blame anybody, and the board can't and shouldn't have relied on that to feel any sympathy for him, because this is a senior executive. He knows the policies of the organization. He knows these processes. And at the time, or after he had been told that he was going to face a disciplinary inquiry, he employed lawyers, including senior counsel. He had no disadvantage in dealing with these charges. He had the advantage of a legal team at his disposal to advise him. Therefore, the board, that's what I'm putting to you, did not have grounds based on condonation to feel any sympathy for him. What do you say?
Chairman, I agree with you, but the board at the time viewed a lot of other similar cases where things were done in 2005, 2006, and they hung on unresolved with no condonation for 5-6 years, and those condemnations get applied for in 2011, because at that time in 2011, we pushed through a communication in the organization that this condemnation story must come to a halt. And also we elevated the authority to allow condemnations to the office of the group chief executive only. And on top of that, we requested that each and every irregularity in procurement must be reported to the board and to the audit committee regularly, because these things have got an impact on how we report our annual financial statements. And also, if I recall, in terms of these irregularities, we then even said that we will voluntarily report them to the shareholder, because they were an embarrassment to the organization.
Yes, but all I'm simply saying is, insofar as Mr. Gama may have been complaining that his dismissal was unfair because of condonation, the board had no grounds to rely on condonation to come to his assistance in circumstances where he had elected not to invoke that process. You accept that?
I agree with you.
Okay. Mr. Mybeck?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Mkwanazi, before the chairperson asked you that series of questions, do I understand your evidence to have been, in effect, that you said, well, look, let's assume that he applied for condonation. The worst that would have happened to him is that he would have got a final warning, because that was the precedent. Sorry, you're on mute.
Worse than that. Not necessarily a final written warning, maybe worse than that. Maybe dismissal, maybe demotion, whatever the people dealing with it would have decided. But maybe worse than that, yes.
But then why did you reinstate him?
The reinstatement comes from a view that there were similar cases or even worse cases where no disciplinary action was taken for 6 years.
But Mr.
On these
Mkwanazi,
cases.
you've just said that the result could have been worse. It might have involved a dismissal.
I don't know. I don't know on in terms of. I'm losing my thoughts a little bit. Can you come back?
Yes, well, I mean, the real problem you have is you don't know what would have happened. But for some extraordinary reason, you dealt with Mr. Gama in the most generous fashion, and you just divined that he would have somehow have been reinstated. Or that he somehow would have not been dismissed.
That is correct at the time when this thing was being dealt with. But as I indicate, there were close to 22 other executives who maybe could have done something similar. And based on that sentiment that here are these 22 other executives who have not even been disciplined, and also based on discussions and engagements with the board, then that decision was taken that maybe a reinstatement with a limited sanction is appropriate. Yeah.
But Mr. Mkwanazi, there were people who conducted themselves, certainly that's the finding of KPMG, in the same way as Mr. Gama, and were dismissed. That was one of their findings. Correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yes, and in fact, have you heard of Mr. Salamela and Mr. Kanye?
Yes.
Do you know that they were the two people who signed the GNS confinement and then presented it to Mr. Gama and then he signed it?
Yes.
Yes. And do you know what happened to them?
I think they were dismissed.
Yes. They were dismissed. Those are two persons involved in the same misconduct as Mr. Gama.
And he was their senior. You remember that?
Yes, I do. He was the CEO of TFR.
I beg your pardon?
He says he was the CEO
He was
of
the CEO
TFR.
of TFR.
Yes. And have you ever taken the time to read the finding of Nazir Kasim SC in that case?
Who was
No,
chairperson? He was chairperson of the disciplinary inquiry relating to those two employees. You never read it.
I haven't read it, yeah.
You didn't have any difficulty with them being dismissed, did you?
I'm not sure if I was there at the time. What year was it, if I can be reminded?
It was in 2010.
I was not there.
But one would have expected that when you dealt with Mr. Gama's matter, the fact that two employees who were under him had been dismissed in connection with one of the tenders for which he was dismissed, I would have expected that you would have been informed of them.
No, you were not informed of those two employees, yes.
Yes. Did you only get to know about them much later?
I did know about it much later, yes.
Yes, okay.
Mr. Mkwanazi, let me just understand before I move on. You as the acting group chief executive and the chairperson, when you took a decision to reinstate Mr. Gama, and where he had been dismissed on one of the charges in relation to GNS, you didn't even know that two other managers junior than him had been dismissed. You didn't even know that.
No, I didn't.
2 months after Mr. Gama had come back, or are you not able to indicate?
No, I don't recall, but it would not have been a few months. It was much later when one was reading about some of the goings on
Yes.
in Transnet and in former employees, because there were many others, by the way. There were many things going on there at the time.
Yes. Okay, all right. Mr. Mybeck?
Well, it seems to me, Mr. Mkwanazi, what you did is you focused on alleged inconsistencies instead of consistencies. I mean, here were two people whose dismissals were consistent with Mr. Gama's. Why did you look at it the other way? I mean, you had the benefit.
Advocate, you are correct. I did focus on inconsistencies because my line of thinking was, why is this individual, when I say my line, even my submissions to the board and discussions with the board, why is this individual unfairly prejudiced when there are 22 others who should have gone through the same experience and nothing has happened to these? That was my line of thinking at the time, and that's the motivation I submitted to the board. And also at the time as well, I was getting dossiers, if I can use the word, on a lot of irregularities in the organization during the month of January.
Well, we'll come to the 22 in time, but perhaps I could just ask you, so why didn't you just discipline the 22?
We did ask Brian Milife to discipline them.
Yes, so?
As a board. I don't know if he did do that. I don't have feedback on that, but I'm aware he tried to discipline two, and he did discipline one, Gary Peter, if I recall, and I don't know about the others. We never followed up with Mr. Brian Milife.
Perhaps you missed my point. Why didn't you just retain the dismissal of Mr. Gama and then discipline and dismiss the other 22? Why not? Why did you do it the other way around?
The point is valid. We did it the other way around because we were sensing unfairness on the sanction of dismissal.
I
Yes.
But, well, let me just clarify something. This concept of condonation within Transnet, it did not mean that if condonation was granted, the employee would not be disciplined. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chairman.
Indeed, you have testified that in respect of some of the condemnations that the board dealt with in 2011, you specifically, as the board, instructed the group CEO, Mr. Molefe, to take disciplinary action against certain managers. Is that right?
That is correct, Chairman. Yes.
Now, I must confess that when I first read, or for some time after reading about this point of condonation, I thought that what it meant was, if condonation is granted, it means that whatever misconduct the employee may have committed in connection with that procurement will not lead to disciplinary action. But Mr. Todd's evidence and his affidavit made the distinction, and I think your evidence seems to be in line with his, to say condonation doesn't mean that you are not going to be disciplined. Is that right?
I agree, Chairman. Yes.
Now, my difficulty then is, what then is the relevance of condonation where the issue is whether the employee was dismissed fairly or not? Why is condonation a relevant factor?
Chairman, you almost need to take the discussion a little bit back. I agree that Mr. Kama was dismissed fairly in terms of the processes. But the question is, had there been a process of him even applying for that condonation, the outcome might have been different. The outcome could have been the same, frankly. Or the outcome could have been he's demoted. The outcome, I don't know what the outcome could have been. But because for whatever reason, his issue did not go through a condonation process, yes, the outcome that came out as per Advocate Antropos.
Well, I don't understand. If the policy of the company is that employees may not do A, B, C, D, and if they do A, B, C, D, they will be disciplined, and the disciplinary process could lead to their dismissal.
That is correct.
And an employee is alleged to have committed that misconduct or acts of misconduct A, B, C, D.
Yeah, yeah.
And a disciplinary process is then instituted. The employee, as I understand your evidence, can't say as a defense to the charge or charges against him, I've been condoned, or my non-compliance with the procedures has been condoned. Isn't it? That's not a defense to a charge.
No. Yeah.
So, if it is not a defense to the charge, why is it relevant to the question of whether the sanction that gets imposed on the employee at the end of the disciplinary process for misconduct A, B, C, D was fair?
Chairman, I think I will repeat myself. It's a what if. Typically, say Mr. Gama had applied for condonation, and say the outcome of that application was you are going to be disciplined, and the outcome of that disciplinary process is a dismissal. That is fair, Chairman, because he had an opportunity to apply for that condonation. Your points about did he apply or did not apply, was it granted or was not granted, are valid, Chairman. I agree with you fully. And being a senior executive that he was, your points are valid.
You see, because part of what I'm trying to understand, and Mr. Myberg is also trying to do the same, is the reasoning of the board in deciding to reinstate him. Because when one looks at the charges of which he was found guilty, I don't know in your mind, but in my mind, they are very serious for a senior executive in the position in which he was. So, and when you look at the rulings of the chairperson of the disciplinary inquiry, both in regard to whether he was guilty of these charges or not, and in regard to the sanction, they are very thorough, they are very, very detailed. And then you can see that the chairperson took care to consider the evidence and the arguments very carefully, you know. And this was an independent chairperson. It wasn't somebody who might have been involved in any maybe factions within Transnet, if there were factions. But it was somebody who was independent, a senior member of the bar. So you then say, but how could the board decide that this person must be reinstated? So you look for their reasoning. And central to the board's reasoning is the condonation process. So because that is central to the board's reasoning as to why they reinstated Mr. Khan, once you say to me, condonation doesn't mean that the employee's misconduct is condoned and he can't be disciplined anymore. Then I say, but what was the relevance of condonation then? Because you have accepted that it was not a defense. It could not be a defense. You can't say when you are charged for misconduct arising out of procurement processes and say, well, I've been granted condonation, so you can't charge me anymore. So help me understand where it is relevant, because it is not relevant to the issue of guilt, isn't it? It is not relevant to the question whether the employee is guilty of the charges. Is that right?
Chairman, there are two stages that the board is trying to explain. The one is that there was a process of condonation within Transnet, but that condonation did not imply that you will not be disciplined. Now, knowing that there was this system of condonation, then the question was, when this Gama matter was dealt with, there were many other cases where condonation had not even been applied for. But I'm going back to an argument that Advocate Myberg touched on, that we don't know whether Gama would have been granted condonation. Even if you would have been granted, it would have been subject to disciplinary action. And the outcome of that disciplinary action, we don't know what it would have been. Could have been a demotion, a dismissal, etc. So that was our thinking then. Now, in fairness to what you are saying, the board would have had no ground if a condonation process had been done by Mr. Gama to deal with these matters. That board would not have had any grounds. But that board as well would have had to deal with the 22 other cases which originated as early as 2005. And that board did try to do that. I'm not sure how far Brian Mulife went, but the board did try to deal with those.
You see, for me, once you say condonation doesn't mean that any allegations of misconduct or any misconduct by the employee is condoned, it actually means that those who have the power to make the decision whether the employee is charged or not, they must do their job. What outcome happens, that outcome will happen, okay?
That's correct.
Now, so if you then say to me, you know, we found as a board that, you know, Mr. Gama was not offered condonation, my reaction is, and so what? He was not offered condonation, and so what? That's my reaction.
No.
Because I'm saying condonation would not have changed anything. If he was guilty of misconduct, the disciplinary process would have led to him being found guilty. And if the sanction of dismissal was found to be appropriate, it would have been imposed irrespective of whether he was granted condonation or not. You accept that, don't you?
I accept that, yeah.
So I go back to my question. He was not offered condonation, and so what? That's my question. Because I don't see where it comes in.
It comes in, Chairman, in that the process was incomplete. In that the issue of condonation should have been tabled by him post this matter being elevated. But it looks like he did not. Now, then this board looks at this and says, had he applied for condonation, the outcome would have been different. It might not have been different. Yes, I agree.
But the fact of the matter is he did not apply, and because he did not apply, he should not get the benefits that he may have got if he had applied. If you want the benefits,
whether he applied or not, I don't have my faith.
yes, if you want the benefits of condonation, whatever they may be, you apply.
That is correct, Chairman.
If you don't apply for condonation, you don't get the benefits that come with condonation. You accept that?
Agree, Chairman.
And therefore, once the board accepted that he had not applied, it should not have sought to give him benefits of condonation that would only apply if he had applied. You accept that now?
Chairman, I do not know if he applied or not. I still do not know, Chairman. But based on the record of the proceedings and also maybe whatever submission his attorney would have made, it looks like he did not apply.
Yes. So what I'm saying is that the board should have sought to establish whether he applied.
Yeah. I agree, Chairman.
And if it established that he did not apply, it should not have sought to give him the benefits of something he did not apply for. You accept that?
I agree, Chairman.
Yes. Okay, all right. Mr. Mybeck, I know that I interrupted you, but I know that you haven't forgotten your
No, I haven't. Thank you.
questions. But I see we are at 25 past. Shall we take the tea break?
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay, all right. We'll take the tea break for 15 minutes. We will resume at 22:12. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Mkwanazi, are you ready? You are ready, that's it, Mr. Mkwanazi. We will start now, Mr. Mkwanazi.
I'm there, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm there.
Okay, let's continue. Mr.
Thank you,
Mike.
Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Mkwanazi, before I finish off with your statement, I just want to confirm, as I understand that you make these two concessions in response to the Chairperson's questions. Firstly, you accept that you went wrong in giving Mr. Gama the benefit of not having applied for condonation, correct?
Yes, that is correct, but also let's not forget that by the time we're dealing with this matter, Gama had taken the matter to the Transnet Bargaining Council. And in view of that, then the board had engaged Dennis Reeds, et cetera, for advice on what you may call the winnability of this case at the Bargaining Council. But yes, I do accept that
Yes, we're going to...
Gama should have applied for condonation. Yeah.
Yes, we're going to come to that advice that you received. The second concession that you've made in response to the Chairperson's questions is you accept that in any event, condonation and disciplinary action are two different things, correct?
I agree, yes.
Yes. And in fact, as I understand you, you accept that whether or not someone is granted condonation doesn't necessarily have a bearing on the fairness of the sanction of dismissal, correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Let us then move to your affidavit. So we've dealt with paragraphs 9.4 and 9.5. Then you say at 9.6, following a review of Mr. Gama's dismissal from Transnet, the board resolved that the sanction given to Mr. Gama was too harsh given the circumstances, as well as the fact that he should, in fact, been granted an opportunity to apply for condonation. Well, we've dealt with that.
We've dealt with that, yes.
Then you go on to say at 9.7, in view of avoiding further litigation in respect of Mr. Gama's appeal of his dismissal, the board resolved that it would be in the best interests of Transnet to settle the matter. By way of a settlement agreement, the terms of which were negotiated through Transnet's internal bargaining process. Is that what you say?
With the help of external lawyers, yes.
But you were actually the negotiator.
Not really. I was the lead negotiator, if I
Yeah.
can put it that way. But in the process, I was advised by Dennis Reeds.
I see. You were the lead negotiator.
That is correct.
And then you say, I wish further to confirm that neither the settlement nor the terms on which the settlement was made were influenced by any member of cabinet at the time. You stand by that?
That is correct. Yes, I do.
Now, you remember if we go back to the beginning, you confirmed that you had been asked to explain the decision to settle with Mr. Gama and the terms of the settlement agreement. You remember being asked to do that?
Yes.
Where do you
Asked
deal?
by who, by the way?
By the Commission. That's why you put up this
Oh, yes.
declaration.
Yes.
Why do you not deal in this declaration with what was paid to Mr. Gama by way of salary, short-term incentives, long-term incentives, costs? of his bargaining council referral, costs of his disciplinary hearing, costs of the High Court proceedings. Why do you not deal with any of that when you were asked to?
Why do I not deal with are you talking about the letter from the commission?
Yes.
Yes, he's talking about that letter here.
Yeah.
You
No,
might wish, I'm sorry, Mr. Mkwanazi. Mr. Mabeg, you might wish to take him to the letter first.
Yes, I
and
will.
just highlight the specific issues, and then he can respond.
The letter is attached to your affidavit. You find that at page 21.1.
Oh, okay. Yes.
And you will see at page 21,
Yes.
21.3, there's a heading reinstatement. 21.4, retrospectivity of reinstatement. These are all contentious issues. Final written
Yes.
warning, costs. Those are all the terms of the settlement agreement. Then at 21.6, paragraph 7, Chairperson of the Commission has directed me to request you to furnish the Commission on or before 20 August 2020 with an affidavit or a firm declaration in which you explain why you and or the Board of Directors of Transnet considered it correct or proper or justified to conclude the settlement agreement on the terms on which you concluded it. So that's not just reinstatement. That's why did you give him a final warning that had expired? Why did you pay him full back pay, LTIs and STIs? And why did you pay his costs? You accept you don't address any of that in your declaration.
If I recall, I might not have addressed it, but if I recall, I wanted to submit a supplementary affidavit, which I have not yet done. And the idea was that I would deal with those issues in more detail.
So let's firstly deal with whether or not you dealt with it in this declaration. Can you please just give us a straight
I don't
answer?
think I have.
Well, have a look at it and tell us.
I do not think I have, yes.
Do you need an opportunity to look, Mr. Mkwanazi? Because I'd like a straight and definitive answer, please.
No, I can look at the issues that are on that request for an affidavit, yes.
I think Mr. Mabeg is inviting you to look at your affidavit to see whether you do deal with the issues that he is raising with you.
In my affidavit that I've got in front of me, I don't deal with those issues, but I did indicate to my lawyer that I wanted to make a supplementary affidavit.
Mr. Mkwanazi, you also don't say anything about wanting to put up a supplementary affidavit in this affidavit, do you?
No, I didn't say anything, yes.
Why not, if that was your intention?
Or maybe let's ask, when did you think of the idea of a supplementary affidavit? When did you think of the idea of a supplementary affidavit?
A long time ago, in actual fact, I've got a draft, but my lawyer is supposed to have a look at it first before it comes to the commission.
Oh, but quite some time after you had delivered this one to the commission.
That's correct. I don't know the date of that
Yes.
one, but it is dated. Yeah.
Okay, all right, Mr. Mabeg.
Thank you. And then at paragraph 10, you say, and you've dealt with this already, when Brian Malefe joined the Transnet board, he was instructed to take disciplinary action against all officials implicated in the KPMG and Nkonki report, correct?
That's correct.
And then you go and deal with that further. You say at 10.5, the board at the time left the rest of the disciplinary processes in the hands of Mr. Malefe. And here you say there could have been another 12 senior managers who could have been disciplined, correct?
That is correct.
Earlier on in your evidence, you spoke about 22. Can we reduce that to 12?
The number is actually higher, but let's remain with 12.
Okay.
Yes, it could be 22, because then I've got to go back and take them out by line item or by name. But I'm happy with 12.
Well, here you say 12.
Yeah, I say 12, but I'm saying it could be higher.
I see.
I would have to go back to the report and actually generate a list.
Then if we go over the page to paragraph 11, your conclusion, the above factors, information at the board's disposal, as well as the legal opinion sought by the board were considered. Now we're going to come to the sequence and chronology of events in some detail when I take you through it, Mr. Mkwanazi, but the opinion of which firm of attorneys are you referring to here?
It's Dennis Reeds.
All right. So are you saying that the Denise Wright's opinion was before the board on the 16th of February?
Yes.
All right.
There were two pieces of opinions by Dennis Reeds, if I recall. There was one which you would call an abridged version, and then there was another one which was a more detailed version substantiating what was in the abridged version. Yes.
All right. Well, then I think I understand it. So you are right. There were Denise Wright's opinions, or certainly input from Denise Wright's, in a document dated the 15th of February, the day before the board meeting. And then on the 22nd of February,
yes,
a few days later, there was the more expanded version, correct? All right, we'll come to
correct,
that.
Yes.
So let me then, so is there anything else you want to say in relation to your declaration and your statement before I move into my questioning of you?
At this stage, you are going to come back to the Dennis Reeds and things.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good.
So let me start off, and I'm going to run through the chronology of events. Amongst the files that we've put up is a bundle 2 where we've got a very long extract from the evidence of Barbara Hogan. And perhaps I should start there, yes.
Okay, I've got bundle 2 in front of me.
So could I take you, please, Mr. Mkwanazi, to page 216. This is the extract from the evidence of Ms. Hogan before this commission.
Page 216.
216.
Yes.
I thought perhaps the one way to speed this up is for me to take you to page 250. And to read to you a paragraph from her affidavit or statement that was read into the record. At page 250, yes. Line 10. Are you there?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mybeck. Which bundle?
Bundle 2,
Bundle
Mr.
2.
Chairperson.
Okay. Oh, okay. 250. Yes, okay.
From line 11, I was shocked and disappointed when President Zuma informed me that he was adamant that Mr. Gama was the only choice for the group CEO. Now, just to place that in context, Mr. Gama was suspended on the 1st of September 2009, there was then an attempt to fill a vacant CEO position of Transnet. And when Ms. Hogan presented the name of Mr. Maseko to former President Zuma, evidence was that he was insistent that Mr. Gama be appointed. And this is what she said: "I was shocked and disappointed when President Zuma informed me that he was adamant that Mr. Gama was the only choice for the group CEO. I informed him that that was not possible and that Mr. Gama was not the board's choice, and I could not override the board as they had undergone a very professional selection process. I further informed President Zuma that Mr. Gama was the subject of an inquiry into procurement irregularities and that it would be very messy to appoint a group CEO who could potentially be facing fairly serious charges. President Zuma said that if that was my view, no appointment whatsoever would be made at Transnet until Mr. Gama's disciplinary process was over. We agreed that I'd provide him with more information." You've no doubt heard of this testimony before.
Yes, I've never seen it in this way, but I've read about it, yeah.
Yes, you've read about it. So there was then a hiatus because Ms. Hogan had to wait until the outcome of Mr. Gama's disciplinary inquiry. And then let's go to that part at page 267. At line 22.
Okay.
No, you know, I waited the outcome of the disciplinary hearing. But once that outcome, once he was found guilty on 3 counts and was dismissed on all 3 counts, the Deputy Minister and myself initiated a process to appoint a new Transnet board. And that was then a year after of this happened. And it was then towards July, August 2010. You see that?
I see that.
And then if I can ask you please to go to page 277. Ms. Hogan then attempted to constitute a new board or have a new board appointed, but she says at line number 3 at page 277.
Which line is that? Can I advocate what paragraph?
Page 277, line 3.
Yes.
She says, well, Mr. Gama was fired at the end of 2010. We know that was in July. And I was fired by the president at the end of October. A few lines down.
He was fired on the 29th of June.
28 to 29 June,
yeah.
yes. I was fired by the president at the end of October. And then at line 10, Mr. Molefe was then appointed as the CEO of Transnet. Line 14, then Mr. Gama was reappointed. So this is where you enter the scene. As the CEO of Transnet Freight Rail, a couple of months later, on the grounds that they had reviewed the sanction and that they had an independent review. I do not quite know what that was about. Chairperson says this was now a different board from the one that was in existence during your time. This was a board, said Ms. Hogan, that had been appointed by Minister Gigabyte, who succeeded me. And you, we know, were the chairperson, correct?
That's correct.
Now, Mr. Mkwanazi, this is also something I can take you to other passages in our evidence that received a lot of publicity. Mr. Gama's suspension and disciplinary action. It was something of a political hot potato, not so?
That is correct.
And you knew about that?
Yes, I knew.
Did you know that Ms. Hogan had been or lost her post as a minister in these circumstances?
I did not know that in detail, but I know it now, having read what I'm reading.
Now the new minister, Mr. Gigabyte, he was appointed as I understand, Chairperson, you correct me if I'm wrong, with effect from the 1st of November.
Yes. Yeah.
So you then met, did you, with the new minister? And the chairperson has asked you, and you confirmed you did that in October, before he had even been appointed?
That is correct, Advocate.
Okay.
Chair.
And you set out in your declaration what it is that you discussed.
That is correct.
Could we go, please, back to your declaration? Bundle 4A.
Bundle 4A.
Yes.
Wait.
And I want to take you to page 4.
Okay, page 4. Okay. To page 4. Yes, I'm on page 4.
You say at paragraph 4.3,
Yes.
if I can ask you to drop down to 4.3.3, he was somehow aware of problems in the procurement of suppliers and services for mega projects in Transnet. Did it surprise you that he was aware of that?
The answer is no, it doesn't surprise me because maybe some of these were already in the media, or maybe he had some inside information, say from Transnet, on what could have been happening in procurement.
Mr. Mkwanazi, was it also in the media that former President Zuma was a devout supporter of Mr. Gama?
Yes, it was, and maybe even more in the media, but yes, it was in the media.
And you were aware of that?
Yes, I was aware of that.
So let's go to paragraph 4.3.4. He was also under the impression that disciplinary matters at Transnet were racially based, and it's the next part of the sentence that I want to focus on, and that there was a condonation process at Transnet that was generally used to deal with deviations within Transnet. He seemed to know a lot about...
that paragraph.
Yeah. How do you think he came to know about that? You smile.
You know, Advocate, you need to understand how state-owned entities operate. They operate in very strange ways, where within these entities, some of these ministers have got sources of information, particularly these big SOCs like, say, ESCOM, Transnet, and I don't know who else. But I suspect somebody inside the organization would have briefed the minister about it, or maybe even outside of the organization. In that case, I'm assuming that it could have been Kama himself.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Do you mean that even if a minister is not a minister of public enterprises, very often they have people within the different SOEs that maybe tell them some of the matters that are going on in those SOEs, or what?
That is what I mean, Chairman.
They have a lot of interest in the SOEs.
That is what I mean, Chairman. Maybe to take it a little bit further, Chairman, you'll have to understand that some of these ministers and members of parliament have got companies that somehow, I suspect, have got an interest in what is happening in these companies, in these state-owned entities. So which is why they have an interest of tender opportunities, if I can to use the word, of whether they exist or not.
Yes. Well, seriously, Mr. Mkwanazi, you see I'm laughing.
Yes.
So you, of course, you were involved in different OSOEs at different times and in different capacities, so I take it you know what you're talking about. Is that right?
That is correct, Chairman. That is correct.
So a lot of the ministers would have companies and they would be looking at tender opportunities in the various SOEs.
That is correct, Chairman.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mkwanazi, sorry, just before the chairman asked you a question, I just want you to confirm that you said, in fact, that the minister might actually have heard about this from Mr. Gama himself, correct?
Yes, I did. Let me maybe expand on this. The chairman will recall that at some stage while Mr. Gama was on suspension, Mr. Gama was lobbying virtually many ministers. I don't know which ones now, but yes, therefore my assumption is that maybe he had shared this, or if it was not him, it could have been any other employee, because the employees in these state-owned entities are strange animals to a certain extent, because they've got certain direct lines to ministers, which even me as chairman at the time might not have had. Yeah.
Well, when Ms. Barbara Hogan gave evidence about the matter of Mr. Gama, she also did say that a number of politicians, including ministers, went public while the process of recruiting or appointing a group CEO was underway, and when there was talk of Mr. Gama being suspended or being charged, or when he had been suspended or was being charged, there were some politicians who went public calling for Mr. Gama to be appointed as the group CEO, and saying that the charges against him were unfair or were trumped up or were intended to prevent him from being appointed as group CEO of Transnet. Ms. Hogan gave that evidence, and I think at the time when she gave evidence, newspaper clippings were included in the bundle that was used, and indeed, I think there was a newspaper article where I think Mr. Mantashe was said to have made statements as well supporting Mr. Gama. I think Minister Nyanda, General Nyanda, I think he was minister at the time, he was also reported in some article to have also come out, as well as Minister Khadebe. So that's in the public domain, and it's before the commission in terms of the bundles relating to Ms. Hogan's evidence. So that part was referred to.
And as I understand it, you knew about all of that.
It was in the news.
Perhaps I could just ask you to turn to page 253 of bundle 2. 253.
Okay. 253. 253.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. 253, is it Ms. Barbara Hogan's bundle?
Yes, at the top. Again,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
quoting from her statement. Mr. Gama was formally charged by Transnet and later suspended on 1 September 2009. Immediately before and in the days following his suspension, Minister Jeff Radebe, Gama will become CEO. Minister Simpiwe Nyanda, Gama is being persecuted like Jacob Zuma, and also ANC, the SACP, the South African Transport Union, and the ANC Youth League under Julius Malema at the time, all issued strong and harsh statements in support of Gama, accusing Transnet of persecuting him. This was reflected in numerous statements and reports in the media, which I attach. You see that?
I see that.
Now, are you suggesting to the chairperson that when you met with the new minister, or soon to be appointed new minister, Gigabyte, he never spoke to you about or mentioned Mr. Gama?
He did.
Yeah.
In my opening line or paragraph, I do indicate that I met Mr. Gigabyte towards the end of October. And amongst a number of issues, he was talking about transformation in the context of black suppliers not being given an opportunity, particularly black legal firms, and also African women not being elevated to top positions. And of course, he mentioned the Gama matter and felt that the sanction in the Gama matter was too harsh or something, because there was this condonation process at Transnet that had not been followed. He did mention something.
Why did you not put that in your declaration?
Yes, I did.
Were you going to put that in your supplementary affidavit, perhaps?
No, it is there. Let me check what folder it's in here.
I think, Mr. Mkwanazi, what Mr. Mybeck is talking about is that you didn't mention in the affidavit that he raised the issue of Mr. Gama. You just said that he raised the issue of condonation from Deviations.
If you read on page 4 of my submission,
Yes.
paragraph 4.3.4, he was under the impression that disciplinary matters at Transnet were racially biased, and that there was a condonation process at Transnet that was generally used to deal with deviations within Transnet.
He was talking about the Gama matter under that.
That is correct, as one of the matters, yes.
Yes. Oh, okay. Well, I must say that when I read your affidavit and I came to that, because you didn't refer to Mr. Gama or his case as such,
Yes.
I had a strong suspicion that he must have been talking to you about the Gama matter, but you are now confirming that there he was talking about the Gama matter. Is that right? You are confirming that?
That's correct, yes.
And he said that the sanction of dismissal in the Gama matter was too harsh, or something, or words to that effect.
He was basically trying to indicate that there was racial bias against African executives in a Transnet, in that African executives were dismissed in disciplinary issues, and yet white executives were not even charged or disciplined in procurement issues.
Yes. When he referred to the issue of condonation, of the condonation process or a condonation process at Transnet, under that 4.3.4, was he saying that condonation had not been used in regard to Mr. Gama, and that should be looked into?
He was not specific that it should be looked into, but he was generalizing that there was this process, etc., etc.
Yes.
And here's this executive who has now been dismissed.
Yes, yes. And when he said the sanction of dismissal in Mr. Gama's case was too harsh,
He was basing it on the public protector letter as well, if I recall.
oh,
And yes, there was, by that time, there was a public protector letter on the 22nd of December.
yes. When he spoke to you, did he have that documentation with him, or he was just referring to it because he knew it?
No, I didn't refer to it at all. I might be mixing things here, because the letter of the public protector only came out on the 22nd.
Oh,
The letter
okay.
from Member of Parliament, Hmg Contract,
Yes.
came out on the 4th of December.
Oh.
So there would have been no linkage.
Oh, okay. But so what was he basing his view on, that the sanction of dismissal in Mr. Gama's case was too harsh, as you recall? What was he basing it on? On the racial issue?
In a
or what?
nutshell, what he was trying to say was white executives get away with much more serious offenses.
Yes. Okay, and black executives would be dismissed for less serious.
That is correct.
Yes. Okay, all right.
That is correct.
But all of these matters that you set out under 4.3, that is 4.3.1 up to 4.3.4, were matters that he was asking you as the
That is correct.
as the person he was offering the position of chairperson of the board, he was asking you to look into seriously at Transnet.
As a board, yes.
As a board, yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Mr. Maibek?
So was it apparent to you that Minister Gigabyte had been holding discussions with Mr. Gama or not?
At the time, no, but I'm aware that Mr. Gama had met the other ministers and even met the president, if I recall, based on even Ms. Barbara Hogan's submission. I was aware that Mr. Gama was running all over the show trying to get sympathy from various organizations.
And when Minister Gigabyte told you that he thought the sanction of dismissal for Mr. Gama was too harsh, what sanction did he have in mind?
John, please advocate. I've got not to.
You did not ask him, or he did not offer
No,
any?
I did not ask him. He didn't volunteer as well.
Yes. Okay.
Was it clear to you, though, that Minister Gigabyte would have been in favor of the reinstatement of Mr. Gama from this discussion and his statement that he considered the dismissal too harsh? Was that clear to you?
Not necessarily reinstatement. The question was the fairness or unfairness of that process, which I did then pose to my legal advisors later on. And they looked at it from two ways, if I recall, who was Dennis Reitz, the fairness of the process itself, and they concluded that the process was fair. And then my legal advisors as well, the fairness of the sanction and the fact that the matter was now going through the Transnet Bargaining Council, and therefore weighing the odds of winning or losing at the Transnet Bargaining Council. Those are the two things that Reitz helped me with, if I recall. And then later they helped me to draft a letter to respond to the public protector on some of the related issues.
Mr. Mkwanazi, that really doesn't answer my question. Let me perhaps put it another way.
Yes.
Was it clear to you, further to this discussion with Minister Gigabyte, that he at very least would have been in favor of a settlement then with Mr. Gama?
No, not really. It was not clear to me. You need to understand that in my negotiations with the subcommittee of the board of this so-called settlement, at some stage I wanted Gama to take a demotion And at some stage, as part of the negotiations, I had put in various things. I had refused to offer him whatever positions he thought he would get. So I don't think that could have been something that he thought I would do. But yes, as I looked into it on behalf of the board, I had to look at the fairness, unfairness, and the probability of winning or losing at the bargaining council.
But Mr. Mkwanazi, again, that's not what I asked you. Could we just have a straight answer and then I'll move on? Was it clear
Yes.
to you, further to this discussion, that Mr. Gigabyte at least would have been in favour of a settlement with Mr. Gama, yes or no?
Not necessarily a settlement, because, hold it. From where I sat, I needed advice from legal experts on how to deal with this matter, because now this matter was going to the Transnet Bargaining Council. So, yeah.
Well, the one thing which you have said, Mr. Mkwanazi, is that Mr. Gigabyte did say that the sanction of dismissal against Mr. Gama was too harsh. Is that correct?
I think so. I think he did indicate that
Or was harsh?
he felt it was unfair.
It was unfair.
Yes.
Yes. Now, based on what he said to you, which you understood to be the grounds for him thinking it was unfair, from what you said to me, it seemed clear that it was implied that he thought that Mr. Gama should not have been dismissed. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with it, but it didn't understand the dynamics of a disciplinary process and also the outcomes.
Yes, no. All I'm simply saying is that based on his discussion with you in regard to the matter of Mr. Gama, it seems that it was implied that his view was that Mr. Gama should not have been dismissed, because you said he said white executives commit more serious acts of misconduct and don't get dismissed, but black executives get dismissed even if they have done something less serious.
No, he didn't say that he should not have been dismissed. It was
No.
the fairness of the process.
Hang on. I just want to make sure you understand. You have not said to me that he expressly said Mr. Gama should not have been dismissed. You have not said that, okay? And I understand that you have not said that, but what I'm putting to you is what seems to me to be what was implied. But you must, once I put the proposition to you, you will indicate if you say you don't share my thinking that it was implied. My thinking is that if he says the dismissal was harsh or was unfair, and he advances as the reason that white executives don't get dismissed even when they have done or committed more serious offenses, it seems to me that he was saying if Mr. Gama was a white executive, he would not have been dismissed. That seems to be implied to me. Do you think I'm being unfair to him?
Chairman, I agree with your interpretation, but then there is a different interpretation that then says, even in reviewing that process with Dennis Reeds, the outcome could have been different.
Yes, no, but at this stage, I just want us to stay with what we make of what he said to you, that is Mr. Gigabyte.
Yeah.
So I understood you to be saying you agree with my interpretation of what seems to be
Of racism.
implied. Yes, you agree with
Yes.
that. Okay, all right.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Maybeck?
Yes, thank you. Just so that I have it clear in my mind, he considered the sanctioned dismissal too harsh, correct?
He didn't use those words, no.
Well, that was the note I took of your evidence.
No, unfair was the word.
Because I was
Unfair
going
was the
to
word.
suggest to
And
you,
therefore, that is why as well, when I briefed Dennis Reeds, I briefed him on the basis of unfairness on two issues, on the process itself, which they came out and said it was fair. And then on the sanction itself, then they also created doubt in view of the fact that this thing was now going to the Transnet Bargaining Council.
all right, we'll come to that. Let me then,
I just wanted to say, I had also thought Mr. Mkwanazi had used harsh or too harsh earlier on, but I may be mistaken.
Let me explain where the hash comes from.
Yes.
When we were deliberating at board in February or late January, that is where the statement of hash was coming from some other board members.
Okay.
you see,
Yes, that statement did come out.
Mr. Mkwanazi, really what I wanted to put to you is that my note reflects that you said
Yeah.
that Minister Gigabyte said dismissal was too harsh, and I wanted to put to you that that's precisely the basis upon which the board in a few months' time reinstated him. The minute says dismissal was too harsh. Was that just a coincidence?
Maybe, but I'm aware that the board, some members of the board did propose that, and even the resolution of the board did capture such a statement.
All right. Let me carry on with the chronology. So this is a meeting you have in October. There's some reference in the...
I'm sorry,
I beg your
Mr.
pardon.
Maybeck. Please don't forget
No, I won't.
what you have in mind. Let me go back to this issue of hash. Mr. Mkwanazi. There can be no doubt, can there be, that Mr. Gigabyte must have thought that the sanction of dismissal against Mr. Gama was too harsh. Because
He might have thought that, yeah.
because the statement he made to you when he said whites commit more serious acts of misconduct and don't get dismissed, in the context, it could only have meant that he thought that dismissal was too harsh. You agree?
He thought that, yes, I agree.
Yes, okay, all right.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Mkwanazi, let's then move forward from October. There's a statement in the papers that says that the new board commenced its duties on the 13th of December 2010.
What age is that?
I'm asking you to confirm that the new board commenced its duties on the 13th of December 2010. Is that correct?
Is it bundle 4?
No, I'm asking you, when did you commence your duties, the new board?
Could have been December 10
Yes.
or December 13.
It was actually December 10.
I'm not sure now.
But somewhere in around December 10, 13 or thereabouts.
Middle of December.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
The middle of December.
That's correct.
All right. Now, if you go to bundle 2, Can I ask you please to turn to page 24?
Can I go to bundle 2? Okay. Page 24.
Yes, that's the public protector's complaint.
Okay. Page 24.
What page?
Page 24, Chairperson. So this complaint you received really within a week or two of commencing your duties as the new chairperson, correct?
That is correct.
I'm sorry, Mr. Maybek. You made a certain point about the use of the sanction being too harsh a few minutes ago. I just want to follow up on that before you proceed,
Certainly.
otherwise you forget. Mr. Mkwanazi, Mr. Maybek just asked you a few minutes ago whether it was coincidental that you said earlier on that Mr. Gigabyte said the sanction of dismissal was too harsh, and we know that later on you said no, he said it was unfair, but he was asking
It was unfair.
you. Yeah, he was
questioning
asking.
the unfairness, yes.
Yeah, you said that afterwards. He was asking whether it was just coincidental that the board also used the same terminology. You have responded to that. I'm not asking you to respond to that one. I want to put this to you that, or you want to say something?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Say it.
Now continue, Chairman.
Oh, okay, all right. No, I want to say, when I saw that paragraph 4.3.4 of your affidavit, where you say, have you lost connection, Mr. Mkwanazi?
No, I'm there, Chairman.
Oh, okay. I just want you to get settled.
Paragraph 4.3.4.
Yeah, that's the one we were referring to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So where you said one of the issues that the minister asked your board to look into was the issue of condemnation processes in relation to procurement matters, deviations, and so on.
That is correct.
So I found it interesting that one of the issues Mr. Gigabyte raised at that first meeting was this issue of condonation from deviation in procurement processes at Transnet, and the basis on which the board ultimately reinstated Mr. Gama was condonation as well. Do you want to say something on that?
Chairman, your analysis is correct. The basis was condonation and the fact that the matter now was going to the Transnet Bargaining Council, and there was a doubt whether we would win the case as it goes to the Bargaining Council. Yes.
Yes, but what my context was, here is Mr. Gigabyte meeting with you, the first meeting he has with you where he offers you the position of chairperson of the board of Transnet and conveys to you issues that he must have seen as issues of priority that your board should look at. He raises this issue of condonation. And of course, you have now confirmed that he did discuss the Gama matter with you. And then a few months later, the board uses condonation to actually justify its decision to reinstate Mr. Gama. So there seems to be a connection in my mind between his suggestion of condonation and the reinstatement. You agree?
There is a link, yes.
There is a link. Okay, thank you. Mr. Maibe?
Thank you. Mr. Mkwanazi, I was going to take you to the Public Protector's letter addressed to you at page 24, bundle 2, on the 22nd of December 2010, a week or two.
Yes. I've got it in front of me.
A week or two after you took up your position as the new chairperson. I just
That
wanted
is
to
correct.
confirm that in the second paragraph, it reads, the complaint alleged irregularities in procurement at Transnet, further that the then Transnet board had unfairly conspired to prevent Mr. Gama from successfully applying for the vacant post of Group Chief Executive, which was about to be vacated by Ms. Maria Ramos. In a meeting with him, Mr. Gama alleged that the motive for his suspension would only have been to scupper his chances of successfully applying for the post. And then the following, and if you go over the page, 25,
Yes.
if you look at Roman numeral 4, that there existed internally a procedure for condoning exceeding limits in respect of transactions, etc. The very point that Mr. Gigabyte had raised with you, correct?
That is correct.
Now, I want to take you, please, to...
Yeah.
Sorry?
You want to say something, Mr. Mkwanazi?
No, Chairman, nothing.
Oh, okay. I thought there was something you wanted to add. Okay, Mr. Maibeck?
Yes, thank you. Now, we know that you then appointed in the next year, early in the next year, KPMG and Nkonki to investigate this complaint, correct?
That is correct.
Could I take you, please, to bundle 1, page 811, 811.
Bundle 1, page 800.
And 11.
I've got it, yeah. I've got it.
Now, this is a letter from KPMG in Nkonki, dated the 12th of January 2011, setting out
Just wait
their...
for me, Mr.
I beg your
Maibeck.
pardon, I'm so sorry.
I haven't received the bundle yet. Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you. This is a letter dated the 12th of January 2011 from KPMG and Nkonki, where they set out their terms and conditions of engagement. Do you see that?
I see it.
Now, that letter is addressed to Mr. Mpoma, General Manager, Legal Services. I could direct your attention to paragraph 1. It says, pursuant to our meeting on 11 January, we confirm and thank you for requesting us, etc. Did you attend that meeting on the 11th of January?
I co-signed that document.
Yes, I know that.
My signature is at the bottom. Yes. I don't recall if I attended it, but I co-signed that document.
But might you have attended the initial
Yes.
briefing meeting?
I don't recall the meeting.
So what you presumably will agree is that you asked Mr. Mpoma to assist you with investigating the Public Protector's report, correct?
That is correct, yes.
And that's presumably why he must have at least have attended this meeting, and then the letter setting out terms of engagement is sent to him, correct?
That is correct.
If we go to the end of that document at page 820, you confirm then that you ultimately signed this document on the
correct.
24th of January.
That is correct.
So, Mr. Mkwanazi, Mr. Mpoma agrees with you that you tasked him with assisting him with responding to the public protector's complaint and investigating it related to Mr. Garma.
That's correct. Yes.
What Mr. Mpoma says is that right from the outset of his involvement in this project, you told him that you had been instructed to reinstate Mr. Garma.
Not in that fashion.
Right.
The instruction was, can you look at the fairness or unfairness of the Gamma disciplinary processes?
So who told you to do that?
That was my understanding in terms of the shareholder instruction. It was not in writing.
Was that Mr. Gigabyte at the October meeting?
That is correct.
So now we can add
That is
another
correct.
paragraph to your affidavit.
I'm not sure. Can you?
Well,
Continue.
so far you've told the chairperson, and these are critically important things. So far you've
Yes.
told the chairperson that what we can add to your declaration is that Mr. Gigaba was of the view that Mr. Garma's dismissal was too harsh. Now, further questioning, what you say can be added to your affidavit is also that he asked you to review the dismissal of Mr. Garma. Correct?
I'm not sure it's the fairness or unfairness. Yes, correct.
Tell us what instruction he gave you, please.
I think I touched on it a little bit in my opening remark in paragraph 1.3.4. Is that he felt that the disciplinary process on Gamma was unfair, based on his assumption that white executives who did similar offenses were never dismissed, but he didn't have facts. He was just questioning the unfairness. So then I took that request to look at unfairness to Siabonga Mapoma and also to Dennis Reeds. And also knowing very well that now there was this Transnet bargaining council route. Yes, I did have a meeting with Dennis Reeds to look at that unfairness.
Mr. Mkwanazi, please can you just focus on what I'm asking you?
Yes.
You said just now that you were asked to review the dismissal of Mr. Garma.
I wouldn't call it a review, but
Well, what would you call it?
Review. To review the fairness or unfairness of the dismissal.
Well, then you and I agree with one another. So
Yeah,
Mr. Gigaba asked you to do that.
Yes,
And he was of his own view that it was unfair.
that is correct.
Before you proceed, Mr. Mybeck, you say, Mr. Mkwanazi, he asked you to, or he thought that he said the process, the disciplinary process had been unfair, but you say
That is correct.
what he put up, what he told you in support of that was how white executives were treated
That is
compared
correct.
to black
He
executives.
racialized it, yeah.
Yes, he racialized it, yeah.
That's
And
right.
now, as I see it, that has got nothing to do with the process as such. Of course, he might have put it that way. Obviously, I wasn't there, I don't know. So, process really is about whether the procedure which was followed was fair. That's the process. But it seems to me that if his complaint was that white executives were treated favorably, black executives were treated less favorably in relation to disciplinary matters. It went to the substance of the dismissal. You might be able to say yes, you might not be able to say yes, but I'm just putting to you what it looks like. The reference to process might be a wrong terminology.
The reference to process.
Yes, because it's not about whether he was given a reasonable notice as to when the disciplinary hearing will start. It's not about whether he was given enough time to give his evidence at the hearing. It's not about whether he was given enough time to cross-examine witnesses who were implicating him. It's not about whether he was allowed to call witnesses. It's not about that. It's simply to say you are treating black executives less favorably compared to white executives when it comes to disciplinary matters.
Chairman, that's a good summary. Thank you.
Yes, okay, all right. Mr. Mybeck?
So he asked you then to look into the fairness of Mr. Gama's dismissal, correct?
That is correct.
Did you feel that you were at liberty to refuse that request?
Maybe not, because at times this could have been a shoulder instruction, but then that is why then I had to follow a certain process to try and address this fairness or unfairness.
Did you construe it as a shareholder instruction, yes or no?
I think it was.
Thank you.
But having said that, we need to understand a certain technicality, because he was not yet the minister end of October. I think he became minister 1st of November 2010, yes. But I construed it as a shareholder request.
Well, he could have had another meeting with you if you wanted. All right, so now...
Sorry, 1 second, Mr. Mybeck. I had wanted to go back to the issue you have just touched upon, Mr. Mkwanazi. I wanted to ask you the question whether at the time you were meeting with him, your recollection is that you were meeting somebody who was Minister of Public Enterprises already, or is your recollection?
Yes.
Or is your recollection that
I was under that impression. Yes.
You were under that impression? But
yes.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. Thank you.
Let me take you, please, to Mr. Mphoma's evidence. Could you turn to bundle 3?
Okay.
And turn up page 30.
Page 30. Yes, I am on page 30.
When you met with Minister Gigabyte or in that October meeting, Mr. Mkwanazi, are you able to remember whether he may have said to you that he had had a meeting with Mr. Gama, or he had, or Mr. Gama had discussed with him his matter? Or is there something you can't remember?
I don't recall that.
Yes, okay, all right.
So I wanted just to take you to what Mr. Mpoma had to say at paragraph 8. He says, I mentioned in this regard that from the outset of my interactions with Mr. Mkwanazi, and we know that they were around the Public Protector report, he made it clear to me that he had been instructed to reinstate Mr. Gama and that he wanted to find a way to do so cleanly. Although I did not consider it my place to ask him who had instructed him, I assumed that it must have been former President Zuma. Now, do you agree or disagree with this statement?
I disagree with this statement in terms of a few issues. The word instructed is too strong a word. The word that maybe would be appropriate would be to review the fairness of the Gama matter. And also the way to say that I assume that it must have been former President Zuma. It's his assumption.
Well, perhaps I can add to that. The chairperson asked him what words did you use that caused him to infer that? And he said that you said to him that it was an authority above the ministry.
No.
Or that the instruction came from higher up?
No, even if he had said that, I didn't say that, and I don't name drop, particularly President Zuma. Please, I don't name drop that person because I've never met him, etc., etc. Yeah.
But, well, that bears out his version because you didn't name drop. He says you didn't. You didn't use the name. That's the point.
I did, yeah.
You understand?
I did it.
Yeah. How would Mr. Mpoma have got this so wrong? I mean, he's a lawyer. He's someone who you entrusted with responding to, seems to me, the most important piece of work that landed on your desk, literally immediately upon you becoming the chairperson. You went out, you sought his advice and assistance. You obviously thought of him highly. How does he get this wrong?
No, I got it completely wrong. He really got it completely wrong. I was close to Mr. Mapoma, by the way, let me admit that. Yeah.
Oh, well, he did say that as well, so that the two of you ended up being quite close. So he's right about that.
He's correct. You need to understand a funny environment when that board came in. We must have interacted as a board with Mr. Mapoma in a period of maybe 3 months on 40 to 50 legal matters.
Yes.
And on all of these, we kept on working with him and also requesting him to consult other lawyers to help us as a board to look into certain decisions. There were many, many matters. And what is interesting as well, for some reason, I don't have records of the January interactions that the board had with Mr. Mapoma.
Yes.
And of course, others as well are missing. Yeah.
Yes. Well, before Mr. Mybeck continues, I note that in paragraph 8, you didn't take issue with Mr. Mapoma's statement where you said you wanted to find a way to do so cleanly. So you took issue with his use of the word instructed, and of course his assumption that you had been instructed by President Zuma, former President Zuma. So you might have used that part of saying, I want to do this cleanly.
Let me indicate that the instruction was to review, not reinstate, and also the word cleanly is almost like legally, looking to the legalities of the issues.
Yes. Oh, okay, so where he says, you said you wanted to do this cleanly, you have no problem with that as long as it is understood that cleanly refers to legally. Yes.
That's
okay.
correct.
Okay, all right. Mr. Mybeck.
Thank you. Mr. Mkwanazi, we've seen that there was a meeting with KPMG.
I'm sorry, Mr. Maybeck.
Yes.
I thought I was watching whether you were going to take this up. Mr. Mkwanazi, just now, you also said what you were instructed to do was to review. So I think that we can accept that you are saying whatever it is you were to do, it was as a result of an instruction. Is that correct?
The review, yes.
Yes, okay. So your query is, it was not an instruction to reinstate Mr. Gama. It was an instruction to review his case.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Mr. Mkwanazi, I just want to ask you, why did you not deal with this in your declaration? Because one of the questions you were asked to address was whether the settlement was influenced by any member of cabinet. Don't you think it would have been necessary for you to explain?
That is why I was indicating that there was a supplementary affidavit which I had prepared many weeks ago, and it was sitting with my legal advisor so that they review it and I submit it. I would have touched on those points there.
Well, let's just deal with that.
So I take it that, and you must tell me if I misunderstand your evidence, I take it that as you give evidence today, you are able to answer that question which was in the letter from the Commission by saying, yes, there was a member of cabinet who influenced the settlement.
I do want to submit I still want to submit a supplementary affidavit which covers some of the points that I know are glaringly not addressed.
Yes.
In terms of a memo I got on the 28th of July, if I recall.
Yes, no, I understand that.
I would like to do it, yes.
No, I understand that part. I'm just basically putting to you the question that was in the letter. Is there a cabinet member who influenced the settlement?
Well,
No. Not to my knowledge, no.
well, in fact, what you were asked, Mr. Mkwanazi, is whether there was any member of cabinet who played any role, directly or indirectly, in the matter being settled.
Oh, yes, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Maybeck. Yeah.
Yeah, if you pose the question that way, then definitely Mr. Gigabyte, in my interaction with him end of October, played a role that says, can you review this matter? But not necessarily the actual settlement agreement.
But then why did you not put that, I'm sorry.
No, I'm not, I don't have a question.
Why did you not put that in your declaration?
Yes, I do indicate that there's a supplementary affidavit coming.
No, but Mr. Mkwanazi, in your declaration, you answered that question in the negative. You can't get out of this by saying you're going to put up another affidavit.
In my declaration, I do indicate that I did meet Minister Gigabyte on a certain date. And also in the declaration that you have, I did not address all the matters you raised in a memo of the 28th of July. I've got a draft, it's sitting with my lawyer right now.
Mr. Chairperson, I see that it is 1 o'clock, if this is a convenient time to break.
Yes, we'll take the lunch adjournment and we will resume at 2 o'clock. We adjourn.
Yeah.